Walk through a crowded train station and look at the faces streaming past you. Tall people, short people, every shade of skin, every shape of eye and nose and jaw. It feels like endless variety. But step back far enough and all of it collapses into one quiet fact. Every single person in that station belongs to exactly one species, one kind of human. That sounds too obvious to even say out loud. Of course there is one kind of human. What else would there be? And that question, the one that feels almost too silly to ask, hides one of the strangest truths about your own existence. Because for nearly the entire span of the human story, there was never just one kind of us. There were many, all at once, sharing the same planet, sometimes the same river valleys, sometimes the same caves. There were powerful humans with heavy brows and barrel chests. There were humans barely 3.5 feet tall. There were humans we know only from a sliver of finger bone, and humans who outlasted every fashion of stone tool for over 1,000,000 years. And then, in a stretch of time so short it barely leaves a mark, almost all of them were gone. All but one. You. So the real mystery is not why people look so different from one another. The real mystery is darker and stranger than that. Why are you the only kind of human left standing? And what happened to all the others who were here with us? If you're enjoying this so far, hit the like button and subscribe. It genuinely helps. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I actually read them. Start with how strange our situation actually is. Look at almost any other branch of life and you find variety piled on variety. There are dozens of kinds of cat, from the house cat asleep on a windowsill to the lynx, the leopard, and the lion. Bears come in many species. So do dolphins, foxes, deer, and the little finches that fill the trees outside. That is the normal pattern for a successful kind of animal. It spreads out, splits apart, and becomes many. For most of our own history, humans obeyed that same rule, branching again and again into a whole spread of different kinds of human. And then, almost alone among large animals, the family collapsed back down to a single survivor. We treat one kind of human as the natural order of things. The truth is closer to the reverse. It is one of the rarest situations in the entire living world. For most of us, the answer feels intuitive and a little flattering. We won. We were the clever ones. We had language, art, fire, and fine tools, and the others, the slow ones, the brutes, simply could not keep up. The picture that usually comes to mind is the Neanderthal, a hunched, grunting cave dweller, all muscle and no thought, doomed the instant a smarter human walked into Europe. It is a comforting story. It sets us at the top of the ladder, exactly where we like to imagine ourselves, and a thread of truth does run through it. Our species spread across the world with startling speed, and wherever modern humans arrived, the other kinds of human tended to fade out soon after. The timing looks suspicious. The pattern is real, but the closer you look at who these other humans actually were, the faster that simple story falls apart in your hands. The Neanderthals were not stupid. Their brains were not even smaller than ours. On average, they were a little larger, around 1,400 to 1,600 cubic centimeters of brain sitting behind that famous heavy brow. They tamed fire and cooked their food. They built specialized tools and made a sticky tar from birch bark to fix stone blades onto wooden handles, which takes careful, controlled heating to pull off at all. They cared for their sick and injured, keeping badly hurt people alive for years. In a cave called Bruniquel in France, more than 170,000 years ago, they walked deep into the pitch black, snapped hundreds of stalagmites to roughly equal lengths, and arranged them into careful rings on the cave floor, for reasons we still cannot explain. At a site in Croatia, they strung eagle talons together about 130,000 years ago, almost certainly as jewelry, long before our kind reached the area. And in 2018, a team led by Dirk Hoffman published the finding that finally broke the old story for good. On the walls of 3 caves in Spain, including one named La Pasiega, there were paintings, simple red shapes and a ladder-like form, made with clear intent. When they dated the thin mineral crust that had grown over the paint, the art came back older than 64,000 years. That is roughly 20,000 years before modern humans are thought to have set foot in that part of Europe. The painters were not us. They were Neanderthals. The so-called brutes had been painting on cave walls long before we ever arrived to judge them. So if they were not stupid, the comfortable story already has a hole in it, and the hole only widens once you meet the rest of the family. Take the Denisovans. We had no idea they ever existed until 2010. There was no skeleton, no skull, no obvious grave. There was a single chip of a child's finger bone, found in a cave in the Altai Mountains of Siberia. A team led by Svante Pabo, the scientist who would later win a Nobel Prize for exactly this kind of work, pulled DNA out of that tiny fragment. The genetic code did not match us. It did not match Neanderthals either. It belonged to a completely separate kind of human, one that had lived and died and left behind almost nothing but that fleck of bone and a long string of genetic information. An entire branch of humanity, discovered from a pinky. Sit with what that means. If one whole kind of human could stay hidden inside a single finger bone for tens of thousands of years, how many others vanished without leaving even that much behind? And the Denisovans were no minor side branch. Their genetic traces turn up in living people from Siberia all the way to Southeast Asia and out into the islands of the Pacific, which means they once ranged across an enormous sweep of the continent for a very long time. A whole successful kind of human, spread over half of Asia, and for years, almost the only physical proof we had was that one finger bone and a couple of teeth. Then, in 2019, a team led by Fahu Chen described a Denisovan jawbone pulled from a cave high on the Tibetan plateau at a place called Baishia, dated to more than 160,000 years old. An entire branch of humanity that had lived across the continent for ages, and we are still only catching the faintest glimpses of who they were. Then comes the strangest relative of all. On the Indonesian island of Flores, in 2003, archaeologists including Mike Morwood and Peter Brown uncovered a skeleton that almost should not have been possible. A fully grown adult who stood only about 3.5 feet tall, with a brain of barely 400 cubic centimeters, roughly the size of a grapefruit. The formal name is Homo floresiensis. Nearly everyone else just calls them the Hobbits. By every assumption we carry about brains and intelligence, a creature with a brain that small should not have been doing anything clever. And yet they knapped stone tools. They hunted. They held on through that island full of giant lizards and dwarf elephants for a very long time. The small brain simply did not stop them. And they were not the only small ones. In 2019, on the island of Luzon in the Philippines, a team led by Florent Detroit and the Filipino archaeologist Armand Mijares announced yet another species, Homo luzonensis, pieced together from teeth and bones in Callao Cave. Another kind of human, on another island that no one had ever suspected was there. There was Homo naledi too, found by a team under Lee Berger in the Rising Star Cave system in South Africa, and announced in 2015. Small-brained, and yet they may have carried their dead deep into a lightless cave, a thing we tend to think of as ours alone. And looming behind all of them stands the great elder of the family, Homo erectus. They left Africa nearly 2 million years ago, spread across Asia, made beautiful tear-shaped hand axes, and survived for well over 1 million years, far longer than our own kind has existed so far. Some of the last of them were still alive on the island of Java perhaps 100,000 years ago. The most enduring kind of human that ever lived, and they too are gone. Think about that length of time honestly. Homo erectus walked the earth for something like 1.5 million years, many times longer than our own kind has managed so far, and still the line ran out in the end. Sheer staying power was no guarantee of anything. Meanwhile, our own species was not young either. In 2017, a team led by Jean-Jacques Hublin dated fossils from a site called Jebel Irhoud in Morocco to around 300,000 years old, the oldest remains of our kind ever found. For most of those 300,000 years, we were not alone on the Earth. And we were busy in those years, leaving our own marks. At Blombos Cave on the southern coast of South Africa, the archaeologist Christopher Henshelwood and his colleagues found pieces of red ochre carefully engraved with cross-hatched patterns, along with shell beads worn as ornaments, some of them around 75 to 100,000 years old. Whoever made them was thinking in symbols, decorating the body, holding ideas that reached well beyond the next meal. It is tempting to say that this was the thing that set us apart, the spark the others lacked. But that is exactly where we have to be careful, because the Neanderthals were painting caves and stringing eagle talons too. Whatever edge our ancestors had, it was probably not a single switch that flipped only inside us. It was more likely a matter of degree and scale, a slightly deeper habit of invention, a slightly wider web of people to pass each new idea along to. For tens of thousands of years, the difference may have looked very small indeed. Stack all of this together, and you reach a fact that is genuinely difficult to hold in your head. As recently as 50,000 years ago, which is barely yesterday on the clock of human evolution, this planet was home to at least 5 different kinds of human, alive at the same time, breathing the same air. 5. And now there is 1. If this is making you think, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss one. This channel only exists because of the people who share these videos, and I don't take that lightly. So we arrive back at the question, except now it has teeth in it. These were not failures. They were not slow or dim. They painted, built tools, buried their dead, and crossed open ocean to reach islands you would need a boat to see. In every way that counts, they were human. So why did every last one of them disappear, while our particular thread walked out of that ancient world as the only survivor? This is exactly where the easy answer, the one where we simply hunted them all to death, starts to crumble. The evidence for some grand war of extermination is surprisingly thin. We do not find fields of Neanderthals slain by human weapons. We do not find a clean frontier where modern humans march in and the others drop the following season. In many regions, the two kinds of human overlapped for thousands of years, quietly, without any sign of a slaughter. In the caves of the Levant, in what is now Israel, the picture is even stranger than a simple overlap. There, in sites like Skul, Kafze, and Tabun, modern humans and Neanderthals seem to have moved through the same stretch of country across tens of thousands of years, each kind present at different times, almost taking turns in the same shelters, long before our line finally settled in for good. And as modern humans pressed into Europe, some Neanderthal groups did not simply sit still and fade. They started making finer tools and personal ornaments of their own, in a style archaeologists call the Châtelperronian, as if they were adapting, learning, perhaps even trading with the newcomers. These were not passive victims simply waiting to be erased. Right up until the end, they were a clever, capable kind of human, adjusting to a world that was shifting around them. Something slower was at work, and in some ways it is more unsettling than a massacre would be. Part of it was the planet itself. The world these other humans lived in was wildly unstable, with ice sheets crawling forward and pulling back, climates lurching from bitter cold to mild and back again within a few generations. The Neanderthals especially lived in small, scattered bands, spread thin across a harsh and unforgiving country. And small populations are fragile in a way large ones never are. In 2014, when Pabo's team read a high-quality Neanderthal genome from a toe bone found in that same Siberian cave, they uncovered something quietly sad inside the code. The individual's parents had been closely related, roughly as close as half-siblings. The wider population carried very little genetic variety. These were not thriving multitudes. They were a thinning, inbred, isolated people, clinging on at the cold edges of a world that kept trying to freeze them out. Around 39,000 years ago, near the end of their time, an enormous volcano erupted in what is now Italy and buried much of the region in ash, one more shock to populations that could barely absorb any shock at all. Now picture what that fragility really means on the ground. A group that small does not need to be conquered to vanish. It only needs a run of bad luck, a few merciless winters in a row, a sickness that sweeps through, a collapse in the herds they depended on. Any one of these can shove a tiny population past the point where it can recover, and once they slip past it, they are gone for good. Modern humans, by contrast, seem to have carried something that mattered more than a bigger brain or a sharper spear. We had each other, in greater numbers and across far wider distances. Our ancestors wove broad social networks, traded objects and ideas across hundreds of miles, and lived in denser, better connected groups. When disaster struck one band, there were other bands to fall back on, to trade with, to marry into, to rejoin. The other humans, scattered and few, simply had less of that cushion. When their luck finally ran out, there was often no one close enough to catch them. The thing that may have carried us through was not how clever any single one of us was. It was how many of us there were, and how tightly we were bound together. Raw intelligence did not win this. Connection did. And it is worth remembering that our own survival was never guaranteed either. Reading the DNA of people today, geneticists keep finding signs that our ancestors passed through their own narrow squeezes, stretches where the number of breeding humans may have dropped alarmingly low. One study published in 2023 even argued that the human line was once reduced to little more than 1,000 individuals for a long and dangerous spell, far back before our species had fully taken shape. The finding is still debated, but the lesson behind it is hard to shake off. We were not chosen. We were not safe. For long stretches, we were every bit as fragile as the others who did not make it. But even that is not the deepest layer of the story. Because there is a quiet problem hiding inside the word extinct, and once you notice it, you cannot look away. Extinct implies a clean ending, a species that was here and then was simply not, like a candle pinched out between two fingers. By that definition, the Neanderthals ended around 40,000 years ago. The last of them died somewhere in the cold of Ice Age Europe, and no full-blooded Neanderthal has drawn a breath since. And yet they are not really gone. In a hard, literal sense, they are still here. When Svante Pääbo's team finished reading the Neanderthal genome and held it up against the DNA of people living today, they found something almost no one had expected. Outside of Africa, very nearly every living human carries Neanderthal DNA. Around 1.5% to 2% of the genome of a typical person of European or Asian descent is straightforwardly Neanderthal. Not as a metaphor, as fact. Genetic instructions written inside a Neanderthal body tens of thousands of years ago are being read and used this very moment. Inside living people, quite possibly including you. And it is not only the Neanderthals. The Denisovans, the ones we know from a single finger bone, live on as well, especially in the people of New Guinea and the islands of Melanesia, where their DNA can climb to 4 to 6% of the genome. In 2014, a team including the geneticist Rasmus Nielsen followed one particular gene, a variant called EPAS1, that lets the body cope with thin air at extreme altitude. They found it in Tibetans, who live and thrive on a high plateau where the oxygen runs dangerously low, and they traced that gift, that exact stretch of code, back to the Denisovans. Let that land for a moment. There are people alive today, raising children high in those mountains, whose bodies handle that brutal altitude because of a gene handed down to them by a kind of human that supposedly went extinct. The vanished are still helping the living breathe. Some of the gene variants we inherited from these other humans shape how our immune systems react to infection, and how our skin and hair respond to sunlight and cold. That immune connection may even hint at how some of them faded. When two long-separated peoples meet, each can carry sicknesses the other has never faced, and a small, isolated population has little defense against an unfamiliar disease. The same close contact that braided our bloodlines together may also have carried illnesses the smaller groups simply could not survive. And every so often, the merging shows up as a single, almost unbelievable individual. In a cave in Romania, researchers found a human jawbone roughly 40,000 years old, and when Pääbo's group studied its DNA, they discovered that this person had a Neanderthal ancestor just 4 to 6 generations back. A modern human with a Neanderthal great-great-grandparent walking around in Ice Age Europe. The two kinds of human were not only meeting, they were family. This is the part that quietly rewrites the whole picture. These other humans did not all dissolve into nothing. To a real and measurable degree, they were absorbed into us. When our ancestors met them, they did not only compete or fight, they had children together, again and again, in different places, across thousands of years. Those children had children of their own, and the bloodlines folded into one another until the separate kinds of human stopped being separate at all. It even blurs the meaning of the word species, because by the strictest test, two groups that produce healthy, fertile children together are not fully separate to begin with. The Neanderthals and the Denisovans did not simply die out and leave the stage. Part of them flowed directly into the only kind of human that remained. The reason it looks like there is just one sort of human left is not that all the others were wiped clean off the earth. It is that the lines between us blurred and ran together until a single outline was all that stayed visible, an outline quietly carrying fragments of everyone else inside it. Which brings us back to that crowded train station and the faces moving past you. You looked at them and saw one kind of human, endless small variations on a single shared theme. And in a way, you were right. But now you know what that single theme actually is. It is not the clean, lonely triumph of one superior species that beat all its rivals and stood alone. It is the last green twig on a family tree that was once a wide and crowded bush, a tree that for millions of years grew many kinds of human, side by side, branch beside branch. We are not the champions of that story in the way we love to imagine. We are its survivors, shaped at least as much by luck and climate and sheer weight of numbers as by anything we can honestly take credit for. Shift a few of the variables. One colder century here, one kinder one there, and the last human left standing might have been 3.5 feet tall, or heavy-browed and broad-shouldered, or some kind of human we would struggle even to recognize in a mirror. There was nothing written in stone about it being us, and we did not walk out of that ancient world alone, or unchanged. We carry the others with us, written invisibly into the body, still active, still shaping who we quietly are. For a few 100,000 years, the Earth knew many different ways to be human. Now, on the surface, it seems to know only one. But that one is quietly built out of all the others. The rest of the human family did not simply disappear into the dark. Some of them just stopped having a separate name, and became part of the only kind of human still here to wonder where they all went. Thank you for watching until the end. If this changed how you see something, check out the videos on screen. I think they will hit the same way. And subscribe if you haven't. See you in the next one. See